Hey everybody, it's Orboss Fitz. Welcome to episode 4 of our Age of Fantasy campaign. Now, when I recorded all this, there was a ton of background noise. It's the spring up here, everything's finally grown, so it was a ton of mowers, people talking. All the audio had to be scrapped. So, what I decided to do was try something new. I'm going to leave you with what I call the narrator. So sit back and get ready for some 10mm action. And I'll be back on the other side.
The Havoc forces pulled back from the plains surrounding the capital, leaving small picket units to keep watch on the Angel and her armies, and send runners to notify the Havoc commanders when the Angel marches. 2 full campaign turns elapsed, with neither side wanting to venture out and seek battle. As the human empire settled into their capital, as the Havoc forces fell back into the valley, the vigilance of the watchmen slipped. Ratmen sprung from nest warrens located in the sewer systems of the city, assaulting the city from the inside. Our community of players sent in battle reports for the scenario posted in the last episode, representing the swelling Ratmen forces emerging from their hiding places. As the results came in, the Ratmen were pushed back to the sewers, and the Watch continues to send eradication teams to ensure that the infestation is purged. In game terms, the human capital was under siege for a campaign turn, and the human empire armies took losses of 500 points. At the beginning of the third turn, more forces entered into the fight for the valley. Havoc forces were able to negotiate an alliance with the ogre tribes that had stayed neutral in the campaign so far, giving the ogres a bounty of slaves and prisoners that were the citizens of the previously human settlements across the valley. The seers of the Havoc forces took inspiration from the massive refuse piles that the ogres created around their encampments. They were able to use the enormous piles of filth as a focus to summon forth demons to bolster their numbers. On the rocky coastline behind the curtain wall of the human capital, ships came to shore. The tales of an angel leading an army of men against the forces of Havoc had made it to other lands. Questing knights from the chivalrous kingdoms have come looking to participate in this holy war. Their code demanding they bring battle to any evil that threatens humanity. Along with the questing knights, other boats landed filled to capacity with support troops gathered from knights' houses, as well as peasant rabble looking to witness salvation on the battlefield. With the fervor of the questing knights and a swelling army, the Angel decided to split their forces for the next leg of the campaign. She will lead an army to the west, in an attempt to reach the settlements located north of the fortress on the river delta. Another army will travel south past the watersheds and near to the swamps to liberate the settlements to the south of the Delta Fortress. Then after the forces of Havoc are beaten back, there will be a 2-pronged assault on the fortress itself. The Havoc forces, having received reports from their picket units, saw both human armies leave the capital. The Havoc Warmaster sent word for reinforcements to move by river to the fortress, while the army in the area moved north to intercept the Angel in the desert. This is a battle that will be determined in the future. Our battle lies in the south. Havoc reinforcements arrived quickly by sailing down the river to the fortress. These troops, along with the new ogre and demon forces, marched south to attack the humans, attempting to secure a path near the swamps. Once both armies were within striking distance of each other, both commanders decided to wait to begin the fight. For another 2 turns, the armies shadowed each other across the desert. The human commander unwilling to commit to battle without an overwhelming numbers advantage, and the Havoc commander content with delaying the humans for as long as possible. For 2 turns, the armies moved and counter-moved, daring the other to enter battle first. What neither of the commanders knew was that another force was watching them, waiting for a chance to strike. On the dawn of the 3rd day, the swamp itself stirred. The swamps of the valley are where the main branches of the rivers flow. Corpses and refuse created by this war had been floating into the reed-choked black water since the first shots were fired, long before the Angel came. Vile necromancers, vampires, and other creatures of the undead dwell within. Now that the war has come to their doorstep, these vampiric undead crawl from the muck and the mire to reclaim the lands they died in life defending. They have been given a second chance to take it in death. The humans' army formed up with the peasant rabble anchoring their right flank, lines of spearmen in the center, and the bulk of their heavy troops on the left flank. The Havoc army assembled with ogres on the left, hardened Havoc warriors in the center, and their contingent of putrid demons on the right flank. They lined up for a third day of staring at each other, neither commander wanting to be the first to make a move. Then around midday, a new force could be seen forming up in the distance. Hordes of shambling zombies, skeleton spearmen, regiments of ghosts, wraiths, cavalry, and 2 zombie dragons ridden by vampire commanders. Seeing this caused both commanders to spur their armies into action, wheeling to engage the undead and issuing orders to charge the field. The skeleton cavalry were the first to engage, slamming into the flanks of the plague slug. The cannons of the steam tanks thundered as explosive shells were aimed at the zombie horde. The aim of the gunners wasn't settled, and the shells that did hit found the rotting flesh to be resilient. With the crashing of the cannons, ranged units opened fire across the battlefield. The grape-shot cannon charges of the ogres tearing into the human spearmen, long bowmen loosing volleys into the oncoming zombies. The bowman commander looked on with a smirk as his troops felled more of the beast than the steam tanks. Havoc cavalry were peppered with crossbow bolts, mostly bouncing off their heavy armor. The last fire before combat was joined was the cracking of rifles aimed at the lead ogre regiment. Troops on both sides gripped their weapons. Close combat was to be joined and the real battle begins. Ghostly troops glided through the underbrush, their speed unhindered. With a shriek, they charged into the questing knight regiment, their unexpected assault pulling the nobles from their saddles and into the mud. Plague warriors grinned as they gleefully charged into the force of vampire knights, their putrid weapons not finding much purchase on the vampires' armor. With their horses bound up, the vampires were unable to kill any of their greasy assailants. With their best battle cry, the peasants charged into one of the regiment of ogre. They were able to cause a few wounds with their farming implements to the rotund beasts. With a laugh, the ogres went to work, cutting into the unarmored bodies of the peasants. Only the encouragement of the holy reliquary they bore to battle was able to keep their composure. On the flank, the creatures ridden by the ogres bellowed as they were spurred to charge into the mounted marksmen, their weight able to smash aside horses and riders alike. The ogres on their backs slashed at the marksmen with their pole arms, breaking up the tight-packed troops. A few of the riders were able to get shots off with their pistols, but it wasn't enough. The mounted marksmen would need to take some time to recover from the onslaught. Longbowmen wheeled to the right to get out of the path of the Empire fanatics, frothing at the mouth to charge at the zombies. They found themselves staring down the path of the Havoc Knights. They quickly knocked arrows and fired into the heavy horse. Some of the riders slumped from their saddles, but the bowmen knew that their death approached. The plague slugs finally noticed that the skeleton cavalry was poking at them with long sticks. They turned to engage. With their stumpy appendages, they took down some of the horses that slipped on their snot trails. But the skeleton knights found their weak spots and skewered the slugs. The second horde of zombies shambled their way through the thick foliage. Their progress slowed to a crawl in the thickets. Frantically, the riflemen reloaded their rifles. With a cloud of smoke, they fired another volley into the ogre regiment bearing down on them. The vampire cavalry slashed and beat at the plague warriors, their sickly forms coming apart at the seams. As the bulk of the putrid unit was cut down, the rest started to dissolve into the ground, leaving the vampires victorious. Another volley of grape shot ripped into a spearmen regiment, sowing panic in the ranks as the men fell in their dozens. Feeling confident that the mass of zombies would not be able to hurt him or his mighty steed, the Empire general on his griffin soared into the mass of rotten flesh. Crashing into melee, the great sword of the general and the talons of the griffin slew many of the undead, their clawed fingers unable to gain purchase on the griffin's feathers. The zombies' connection to their necromancer faltered for a moment, corpses falling to the ground and remaining still once more. The skeletal spearmen marched in unison through the difficult terrain, spear points out ready to receive any charge. The plague toads, seeing that their lesser demon allies had perished, took the opportunity to hop into the vampire knights. Feeling the effects of fatigue, the knights were unable to mount an effective defense, as more of them were snatched from their saddles by grasping slimy tongues. The steam tank commander decided that their gunners needed more training and chose to launch his steel behemoths into the Ghost Regiment. He was rewarded with many popping noises. He is now aware that ghosts pop. Seeing that the human general had overextended himself from his lines, a vampire on a zombie dragon took the opportunity to fly over the melee and hit the general in the flank. While preoccupied with the zombies, the Griffin was caught completely by surprise and sustained huge injuries. Without the opportunity to fight back, the Griffin took to the air and fled the field, leaving the Empire army without their general. The Havoc heavy horse barreled across the open field directly at the longbowmen. The weight of their charge crashing in and the heavy melee weapons that followed cut down swaths of the bowmen. Unable to do any damage in return, the bowman unit started to panic. The fanatics were unleashed upon the zombies. Their lunatic cries echoed across the field as they swung their flails and bludgeoning weapons to crack the rotting skulls of the undead. As the humans charged in, some of the zombies were able to get under their weapons and drag them kicking and screaming into the horde. Once again, the necromantic powers that kept them animated flickered, causing more of the corpses to fall. More skeletons marched through the underbrush, presenting the early beginnings of a phalanx of spears aimed at the Havoc forces. Plague swarms entered the underbrush with the skeletons, their chattering heard over the creaking of bone and sinew. In an effort to rescue the long bowmen from their fate, the regiment of crossbowmen wheeled around and fired their bolts into the flanks of the Havoc horsemen. Their onslaught taking down some of the heavily armored forms, but the morale of the cavalry held. They were intent on their slaughter of the bowmen. The second of the zombie dragon riders charged into the flanks of the plague toads. A combination of its acidic breath weapon, heavy talons, and the vampire's heavy lance was able to reduce their number. The plague frogs broke and hopped from the battlefield, leaving nothing but a stinking puddle where their compatriots' bodies twitched in the dirt. The ogre regiment that had been getting peppered by rifle fire charged into the riflemen, their hulking forms tearing the riflemen limb from limb. The sight of their allies getting disemboweled and devoured was enough to break the survivors. They fled screaming from the field of battle. Entering the space that was now open, a regiment of spearmen led by a battlemaster charged into the ogre regiment. Their assault stopping the ogres from their grisly feast. Enough of the ogres were cut down that the regiment broke coherency and would need to recover before it continued with their buffet of carnage. The last two regiments of undead, another skeleton spearmen and a skeleton guard unit, moved forward to engage any enemy that managed to break through the zombie wall. A regiment of Havoc warriors was finally able to drag itself from the difficult terrain and into the open field. On the flank, the mounted marksmen were able to rally into a cohesive force again. A greater avatar of plague stirred. It decided to make its way towards the second unit of zombies. A regiment of halberds charged into the fresh regiment of Havoc warriors. They believed that they could damage the fiends with their polearms. That belief was misplaced, as the Havoc warriors proceeded to butcher the halberds to the man. The ogres entwined with the mob of peasants were bewildered by the lack of any order in the humans. They were able to strike down a few of them, but the constant strange attacks had them on the back foot. Seeing the fate of the halberds, foot knights decided that it was their turn into the fray. They charged into the Havoc warriors with greater effect, just barely. The foot knights at least were still standing. The second regiment of Havoc warriors was able to pull itself free from the brambles and into the open field. The spearmen regiment that was broken previously by the ogre's cannons was able to rally. Then the regiment of ogre iron warriors, finding its path blocked, maneuvered to find their own enemy to play with. The regiment of questing knights pushed back on the ghosts that have had them entwined, their lances and swords passing through the ethereal forms, leaving them firmly entrenched in swirling combat. The Havoc general on his dragon charged into the knights on foot, its breath weapon cooking some of the knights inside their heavy plate armor. The dragon then proceeded to swipe its massive claws and cut down more of them, but the knights refused to falter. With little room to maneuver, the regiment of guard knights sped towards the open hole in the line, while the regiment of elite weapon masters headed to engage the remaining zombies that had been cut down to a reasonable level. Kicking off turn 3, a regiment of skeleton spearmen charged into the plague swarms. The tips of the spears piercing the pus filled balls of filth easily. The plague swarms attacking back were unable to find any way to damage the skeletons. With a giggle, the remaining plague swarms dissolved into a puddle, forever tainting the ground they fell on. The avatar of the plague god charged into the rear of the zombie dragon, its massive fleshy fists tearing at the wings and rider. The dragon took what appeared like mortal wounds, but the dragon was already dead and still moving. The mounted marksmen pulled back from the ogres on their beasts. With a bellow of fire, the regiment unloaded a volley of their flintlock pistols into the ogres. Ogres fell from the saddle, but it wasn't enough to shatter the regiment. Skeletal spearmen charged into the human elite weapon masters, their spears piercing the armor of a few of the humans' cuirass armor. The weapon masters hacked at the skeletons with their great swords, cutting down a third of the regiment of skeletons. The fresh Havoc warrior regiment charged into the crossbows, butchering the regiment and sending any survivors screaming off the field. Human spearmen fighting the regiment of Ogre were able to take down a few more of the brutes, causing the Ogre regiment to quit the field of battle. The plague slugs continued to be a problem for the skeleton cavalry, their massive bodies able to withstand the lance strikes while taking more skeletons out of the saddle. The peasants fighting the Ogre regiment's battle cries started to waver as more and more of the non-armored humans started to be rent asunder. The fanatic unit fighting the remaining zombie in the first horde finally were able to remove the last of the shambling undead from the field, only to catch the attention of the skeleton guard regiment behind where the zombies were. The skeletons crashed in, killing all but a handful of the zealots, but the few that remained refused to run. The Havoc cavalry continues their wild orgy of destruction against the longbowmen. The few survivors that still lived ran from the board. Seeing the opportunity, the Guard Knights charge into the Havoc cavalry. The Havoc Knights soon find out that they weren't fighting lightly armored bowmen anymore, as the lances of the Guard Knights kill every remaining Havoc creature in front of them. The Ogre Iron Warriors see an opening and charge into the regiment of spearmen that had just routed an Ogre regiment. The iron-plated Ogres barrel in, using their huge two-handed swords to cut through half of the humans in the regiment. The zombie dragon entangled with the plague avatar takes the opportunity to fight softer prey. It smashed into the flank of the human elite weapon masters. It washes the regiment in its noxious breath weapon, while its heavy claws kill more of the warriors. With skeletons to the front and a zombie dragon to the flank, the regiment breaks and flees the field. The steam tanks about face. The commander trusting his gunners again, they load up explosive shells and fire point blank into the skeleton spearmen. The commander is showered in bone fragments and sees that half of the regiment has been blown to shards. The Havoc Dragon continues its onslaught against the Foot Knights. To their credit, the regiment never broke, but died to the man getting torn to ribbons by the dragon's heavy claws and teeth. Possessed with a bravery that no live man would possess, the remaining zombie regiment charges into the Avatar of Plague. Their many attacks with their dirt-caked fingers are able to get a hold of some of the Plague Avatar's innards. They cause it pain, as they all dive towards the bloody putrid pile. The questing knights form up and get a proper charge into the remaining ghosts. This time their attack finds purchase, as each of the ghosts are banished from the realm of the living. The cannon ogres once again level their grape-shot cannons at the spearmen regiment that they have been shooting for this entire battle. After the smoke clears, the spearmen simply cease to be. This was the moment. This is where the human army broke. All of the remaining human combatants on the field turned and fled, leaving the fate of the battlefield to be decided between the Havoc forces and the undead. The fighting was not over. The flank zombie dragon flew to assist the skeleton cavalry with killing the remaining slugs, while the second regiment of skeleton spearmen marched through the difficult terrain to form up with its sister regiment. The Avatar of Plague swept its fleshy disease-ridden claws across the zombie regiment, bowling over and crushing scores of the crumbling undead. The rest of the Havoc army that had been engaged further afield now turned their attention towards the vampiric undead army. The skeleton spearmen regiment that had been trudging through difficult terrain, the whole battle finally made it to open ground, only to be charged by a regiment of Havoc warriors. The spearmen did little damage to the heavily armored troops, and the warriors shattered the skeleton regiment utterly. The zombie dragon that had routed the elite weapon masters charged into the 2nd Regiment of Havoc warriors. It fared a bit better with its breath weapon and claws, but when the warriors attacked back, they were able to tear the zombie dragon apart. The Iron Ogres maneuvered around the victorious Havoc warriors, not wanting to miss their opportunity to smash the bones of the enemy. The sister regiment to the first that were slain by the warriors charged in to avenge their comrades. They again were barely able to fell a few of the warriors, but did survive the strikes back as the Havoc warriors were fatigued. The Havoc dragon flew across the battlefield in an effort to clean up the remnants of the skeleton spears on the right flank. It made short work of them, shattering any magics that held the skeletons together. The Skeleton Guard regiment charged into the Havoc dragon. They were able to damage the beast, but not enough to concern the Havoc general. The dragon half-heartedly swiped at the guards, but their armor held. The Cannon Ogres moved forward and leveled their cannons at the horde of zombies that had engaged the Avatar of Plague. With a mighty report, the grape shot hammered into the zombies, absolutely shredding anything in the blast area. The combined forces of the skeleton cavalry, the vampire cavalry, and the zombie dragon charged into the front flank and rear of the Havoc warrior regiment closest to them. They were able to cut down half the regiment of Havoc warriors, but the hardened troops held their ground, refusing to break even under these odds. The Avatar of Plague ended the existence of the few remaining zombies remaining on the field. At the beginning of turn 5, the Skeleton Guard again assaulted the Havoc dragon, its hardened hide able to stop most of the skeleton's attacks. It was focused on defense and was unable to do damage to the Skeleton Guard unit. The iron will of the Havoc commander kept the dragon from fleeing. The Avatar of Plague charged into the remaining skeleton regiment. With its outstretched arm, it was able to break the necromantic bindings of the entire regiment, their bones falling to the ground in heaps. The continued onslaught of the zombie dragon and the undead cavalry was able to drag down the remaining Havoc warriors that were engaged with. A regiment of ogre saw an opportunity. It charged into the remaining skeleton and vampire cavalry, their massive bulk crushing the vampire cavalry, then their massive weapons smashing through half of the remaining skeleton riders. The remaining regiments of the Havoc army moved to engage, the Iron Ogres charging the Skeleton Guard, and the last remaining Havoc warriors charging into the zombie dragon. The Ogres were able to shatter the Skeleton Guard regiment. It doesn't matter how much armor you're wearing when you get hit with half a ton of steel. The Havoc warriors were able to damage the zombie dragon with their heavy weapons. The vampire atop the dragon felt the necromantic energy slip for a moment, and parts of his dragon fall away. Deciding to retreat and fight the Havoc armies another day, the vampire took flight, fleeing the battlefield, leaving his remaining undead to crumble into dust as he crested the horizon. With the human army routed and the undead beaten back into the swamp, the Havoc forces moved back to their settlement south of the Delta Fortress. There they will await orders from the Havoc Warmaster on where they are needed. The human army is broken and will continue to retreat back to the capital. The undead will continue to receive the gifts of corpses from the slain of the war thrown into rivers and bogs. They will eventually gather enough strength to engage the great armies again. But for now they will be content to rebuild. They have all the time in the world. Across the northern mountain ranges, the sound of rotors can be heard echoing around the mountaintops. Your mission this week, players, is to play a standard game of one-page rules. It can be any point value you like. It can be any armies you like. You will be playing for the outcome of the battle in the north between the Pale Angel and the Havoc army of the River Delta Fortress. You can send in your battle reports to warbossfits@gmail.com, as well as the Warboss Fits Discord channel under Campaign Games. It is up to you to determine the victor of this leg of the campaign. Remember, the main objective is to have fun, and I can't wait to see your submissions.
Hey guys, you're back to the War Boss now. Remember to like and subscribe and leave me a comment to let me know if you like the narrator reading out the campaign battle reports instead of all the broken English that comes out of my mouth. So until next time guys, remember it's a game, keep it fun, and I hope to see you across the table from me someday. Until next time, bye bye.